This episode of Living Corporate is brought to you by Blind. Blind is a trusted community of more than 5 million verified professionals from startups to some of the largest companies in the world like Amazon, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, Goldman Sachs, Google, JP Morgan, Meta, and more. Blind's mission of transparency seeks to break down professional barriers and silos at work so that you can make productive change and advance your career. It's a safe space to ask questions and get the real-time insights and perspectives from people who know what you've been through. On Blind, you can connect and have honest discussions about everything from compensation, company culture, performance reviews, promotions, and more. You can also join your exclusive private company channel to chat with your coworkers about company policies and what's really going on at work. And because it's anonymous, you can be honest and trust what you read on Blind. Download and install Blind from the App Store or visit teamblind.com to get access to the latest salary, company reviews, and interview experiences at thousands of companies worldwide.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Break Room. The Break Room is a podcast by Black mental health professionals for Black professionals with a mission to remind you that you matter, you're valuable, and your wellness and joy are a priority for liberation. My name is Olajide Bamishigbin. I'm a health psychologist and a father of two. And I'm married to my beautiful wife, and I have a family as well. And I'll pass it over to our other wonderful co-host.
Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Nikki. I am a licensed psychologist and SciPAC credential therapist in the state of Texas. And I have a private practice that focuses specifically on Black women and couples' relational and sexual wellness. And then I also am a racial equity consultant and trainer.
A good one.
Thank you. Me and Gina got to work together. We got to work together recently, and it was a good time. I would do it again, 10 out of 10. And we welcome you here to the break room. We are excited to jump in today's conversation, as we typically are. You know, the good thing about a podcast is we get to direct what the conversations are, and we get to talk about the things that we think are most important. So we appreciate you for joining us every week. And if you have not, go ahead and give us a 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to our podcast. Make sure you follow and like and share.
Yes. So if you haven't been with us, what we usually do is we start off with some tea. You know, we get together in the break room and share some tea, some news, some gossip that may be of interest. Then we'll talk about our topic for the day. So today we'll be talking about mental health diagnoses at work, whether to share them or not. And then we'll get you with our last nerve, which is a segment where one of us just gets to share exactly what's getting on our last nerve. So that, that's our schedule for today. And I'm really excited for it.
Let's get into it.
So let's get started with our tea. So Dr. Nikki, you had some tea related to the Woman King.
So the Woman King came out, I think it'll be 2 weeks today, I think 2 weeks. And so the Woman King is it's a dramatized film based on, some historical events, and it follows the homemade, peoples towards the end of their contribution to the enslavement of Africans with Europeans. And particularly there's emphasis on this women warrior military group called the Adhd. And so I have mixed feelings, right? So let me say this. I went to see it. I went to see it with my daughter. The acting is phenomenal. Like it's a beautifully told story. It's very engaging. It was a good opportunity for me to talk to my daughter, some cultural socialization, right? About like clarifying history around enslavement. And she was really confused about why Black people were involved in the selling of other Black people. Like that was a part of the narrative that we don't talk a lot about. But I think it is a dramatized version, and I know some folks have had some, druthers about that, right? Like, the story doesn't highlight the Dahome's complicity with the enslavement of Africans, but it doesn't shy away from it either. So if you go into it with the opportunity, like, you're going to be entertained from a historical vantage point that we really don't have any other representation of that in the general sort of mainstream media. Not that I'm aware of. I feel like this is the first time this story has been told on this level in this way. I think, definitely go and support that. We cried, there's humor. Yeah. So I would say go check it out. I think it's worth your time.
I said there's Black people in it.
There's some beautiful Black people in it. Like, beautiful Black people in it. And I think just being able to see the strength of the women, and then, I followed along, and there's a Black woman director, Gina Prince Bythewood, and
who directed Love and Basketball.
Love and Basketball, yeah. For real, right?
A classic. And she didn't get another chance to direct another movie for like 10 years after.
Yep.
Because that's what it's like to be a Black woman director in Hollywood. So
sorry. I wanted, but that's all important, right? That's all part of the reason why I wanted to support it. Cause it's it's a predominantly Black, cast. The Black people are for sure in positions of power. And I think I think we need to be having these more comprehensive conversations about our history, and, we're not a monolith, right? So being able to have a conversation to say, just because we Black don't mean we're like above reproach. Like, we contributed to this experience, and we will be accountable for that. So check it out. Viola Davis is one of the producers. She fought hard for it. The women in it trained hard for it. You can tell. So, and aesthetically, it's gorgeous. Aesthetically, it's gorgeous. The hair, the fabrics, the dress, the jewelry, all of it. So, The Woman King. That's the tea I'm sipping on this week.
Okay. Me and my wife need to watch it. So we'll
have a little date night
in a few weeks. Let me just say that.
Look, in a few weeks it might be on Prime, because that's how things go. You get out in the movie,
and I'm okay with that. We got surround sound. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you. So watch The Woman King.
Go watch The Woman King.
We'd like to know your thoughts.
For sure, definitely, and always we want to hear you interact with us. And then the other thing was finding out that Coolio died at age 59.
Rest in peace.
That's not old. I mean, he's not a young man, but that's not old either. I think it was of a heart attack.
That's not an old man.
So,
allegedly, cardiac arrest.
Allegedly, we don't know what induced the cardiac arrest, right? But I think it's just a reminder for us as Black folks, like, we got to take our health seriously, because our proximity to chronic health issues and deleterious outcomes from our health issues is way too close for us to be sort of playing around. So rest in peace, Coolio.
Rest in peace, Coolio.
Yes. So should we get into it,
G-Day? Okay. Let's get into it. So the topic for today is about sharing your mental health diagnosis at work. Should you not?
No, just
why kidding. Or why not?
No, show over.
All right, that's the easiest check I ever got. Let's just go. So what's your first reaction to that?
I am being somewhat flippant, and I think the whole reason why we're having this conversation is because it's not a straightforward yes or no answer for the majority of Black folks. Mm-hmm. In the workspace, and maybe even in other parts of your life, right? But we know that Black people experience mental health diagnoses, that we see prevalence rates of mental health issues, mood disorders. So when we talk about mood disorders, we're talking about major depression disorder or anxiety are like two of the most prevalent and common mental health diagnoses in this country, and Black folks are not immune to that either. So we tend to experience them at a slightly higher than would be expected rate. So there's, millions of Black folks that have mental health diagnoses. And then that's what we have in terms of access to public health data, right? So there are folks that could be underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, or just never received a diagnosis as well. So when you have a diagnosis, particularly depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorder, and then I would also include a range of diagnoses that fall under a neurodivergence umbrella. So ADHD, or on the ASD, or so autism spectrum.
Or if you could you spell out what ADHD is for some people who may not know it?
Sure. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There was a period of time where sort of common practice was to think about you either having one or the other, but research has shown and more sophisticated analysis has shown like most people exhibit some parts of both of them, and it really reflects challenges around attention, concentration, focus, organization, processing, things that really require that if you are able to be successful in any sort of professional level with any responsibility, like those are skills that might show up differently for you, or be more of a stretch for you in different ways. You might have more challenges around that. The other piece around ADHD that I don't think we talk enough about is like it significantly impacts your motivation. So I think we could talk about that in terms of depression too, right? So there's some research to support it affects the dopamine levels in your brain, and your dopamine is like you want to do something. It's the part of the chemical in your brain that gets you to do the things that you need to do. And ADHD folks tend to have lower dopamine. So if you think about that, right, if you have something that is really impeding your capacity to show up and perform at your optimal best, that is oftentimes outside of your control, right? Because you can be in treatment, you can be even on medication, you could be adherent to all of those things and still experience anxiety that causes impediment at work or in your life. You could experience depressive episodes still, and that there might be aspects of your job that don't facilitate your neurodivergency at all, or right? And so this isn't about whether you're in control or not in control, right? If you're working if you're a good quote unquote professional or good at your job or competent, this is about recognizing that there are real limitations, or at least different expectations that might need to be put in place for you if you have a mental health diagnosis. So the question is about, do you disclose that or not? Because technically, under the American with Disabilities Act, you should be afforded the right to have reasonable accommodations in your educational or workplace settings if you have a diagnosis that meets requirement for, my mind just went blank. There's a particular language around a functional impairment, right? That whatever your
functional impairment or limitations, criteria. Right?
Yes, right. But Jide, what are some reasons why Black folks might not be so keen on disclosing their mental health diagnoses in their places of employment?
There might be a million reasons why somebody might not be keen on it. You may. So first to the question of should you or not, there's no right answer. It depends on so many different things. I'd say the number one thing it depends on is the person or people you work with. Right? Like, you can get a sense of who your boss is or who your kind of
and let me be more specific than that. They don't
seem like the type of place. Go ahead.
The people that's evaluating you, the people that's going to do your performance eval.
Yes.
Right? Because
yes.
If you can't trust it, if everything about your experience as a Black person, that you've learned about how to engage with whiteness, and white culture, all of those spidey senses that we have to develop for our survival. If you know your supervisor is in that category, and that it could be used against you. Anything you say or do can be used against you in the performance evaluation. I think for me, is the specific criteria. I don't know if there's other things you would take into consideration.
I mean, so I think I live in Southern California, in a place where like I could throw a rock and somebody's gonna have a therapist. You know what I'm saying? Like there's like a more open kind of discussion and world about it here, and in certain areas versus certain places. Like you don't want to say those words at all, right? You don't want to say mental health at all because people go look at you like, are you crazy? You know, are you insane? What's wrong with you? Texas, for example, I didn't want to call out no states, but yes, Texas, for example. Texas, for example. So you have to be careful, but I think things you have to be mindful of. Why you might not. Well, you're already being black is already in a lot of the people's minds a diagnosis against you. It's already something that's being held against you. You don't want to add anything else to your file against you because just by virtue of being black, you already have a black mark on your file, right? On your evaluation, every single thing is going to be read through the lens of you being a black person.
Absolutely. I think that part is so critical. It's the lens through which you are being perceived in the workplace. And we know for sure that white folks have access to more individualistic aspects of their personality that they get to be appreciated for or judged on, evaluated by, experienced through than folks of color. So we always know that regardless of who we are, what our competencies are, what our challenges are, we are always being seen through the lens of race. And we know for most black and brown folks, there are a range of negative stereotypes, and particularly around anti-blackness and our trust, our ability to be trusted, generally speaking, our ability to be non-threatening to folks, our ability to be seen as competent, intelligent, right? All of these things are basic, everyday common stereotypes that we all encounter to varying degrees in the workplace at the bare minimum, right? And so now you want to talk about disclosing more personal information that can make you very vulnerable, right? So in some ways you might get the accommodations, but it also opens you up to some vulnerability.
But also at the same time, you may be in a place where you need those accommodations, right? Depending on what your specific diagnosis is, or whatnot, so you may, I like to think sometimes like you may be, you may have narcolepsy, you may be a narcoleptic, right? Like you just fall asleep, right? You if that's the case, you may need to inform your boss of that, right? You might have to tell your work about that, because they might be like, so-and-so's supposed to be on this meeting and they're not here. Well, actually here's what you can expect, and here's how I need to modify my schedule, right, to accommodate this, because I know that between X time and X time, I'm more likely to fall asleep. So I can't schedule meetings during this time. Right? Absolutely.
I mean, I think optimally, we want to be moving to a place where we create, right, in all of our DEIA initiatives, we should be thinking about a workplace that facilitates someone bringing their strengths to the table, regardless of whatever their diagnoses are. But we know that that's not realistic for where we are. We're not as evolved, and most workplaces are not as flexible around that as possible. And so, honestly, I work with clients for whom we've had to have this conversation, right? Like, I am struggling. And in fact, the demands of the workplace are exacerbating my mental health diagnoses, which is causing me to be more impaired in the workplace. And so now I'm like in this really uncomfortable, unhealthy catch-22. So do I disclose or not? And that's a hard decision to make. And what I always try to do is work with folks to say it is ultimately your choice.
And Just you saying that about disclosure or not made me think of another factor you have to think about is your type of workplace, right? So Dr. Nikki and I were both professors. So being a professor and being a student and having a diagnosis is very different because you never have to tell your professor direct. I've had countless students who needed disability accommodations. There's an office dedicated to that who contacted me and told me what accommodations to make. Right? It wasn't no back and forth between me and the student or them having to disclose, oh, I'm suffering with A, I'm suffering with B, I'm suffering with C. No, it was entirely out of our hands. But depending on your workplace, you may be in a workplace where it's like, it's only 10 of y'all. You know, like if you have to let your boss know, you have to let HR know. Or if you work for like a broader multinational global corporation, right? There's probably resources in place that might handle it differently.
Yeah. And so that's where I think the sort of interpersonal piece that you were bringing up earlier comes into place, right? Like, yes, in a mid to large size organization, there's more degrees of freedom. So potentially more anonymity, protection, etc. But there's always the personal thing. And honestly, we talk more openly about mental health in our society generally. But one, we want to recognize like there's some generational cohorts differences that are in place, right? So, people who are baby boomers or traditionalists might be way less accommodating or understanding, or even ability to really fully understand what having a mental health diagnosis might mean in terms of your capacity and competence and, even, dedication to work versus folks that, are likely millennial or Gen Z, where there's just much more openness about that as well. So the work context itself makes a huge difference. And, you know, I always tell people to, you know, let's think about if there's a middle ground, right? Are there ways that you could create, are there ways that you might have enough autonomy or control in your work environment that you can use some of the accommodations that you created on your own, right? Because most folks that have a mental health diagnosis, they have figured out how to work with their particular challenges. They have adaptations that they have made. And so you can make those work to your optimal benefit without disclosing. That's another way to sort of navigate that particular vulnerability.
Yep.
But it is vulnerable because we still have just stigma.
To piggyback on that, at the end of the day, this is a test of vulnerability. And the thing about vulnerability is that no matter how hard you try, you can't ever predict how it's going to turn out. You know, I read Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, which I really loved, and you know, which taught me a little bit about it. But you can't, like, it's literally putting yourself out there, right? Somebody may give you a hug, somebody may throw a tomato at you, but that's the risk of it. It's scary and it's dangerous. Yeah.
It is. No, it very much is. And, you know, we're talking about our livelihoods, right? And so we don't want to put ourselves at any undue additional danger. And so those are all the downsides. The positive sides are, which I want to just reemphasize, right? It's like you do have protections under the law, that would afford you a certain level of, safety, that affords you a level of, objective accountability about your performance, that can give you, sort of a what's the word I want to use? Like a barrier between whatever stigma your peers and or supervisor may have and your experience in the workplace, if you have a good HR. And so that's the other thing. If you have a good HR and a good boss and good people around you. Exactly, right? And if you can do your work with accommodations that allow you, let's clarify that. So accommodations aren't like a hall pass, like it's not a free carte blanche where, oh, well, you know, he got accommodations. So no, it's really about putting things in place for you to be able to function in your workplace at the same level as folks who don't have a disability or diagnosis of any kind. So it's not a leg up, like it's not an advantage, but it's an attempt to sort of level the playing field. Yes. And so we wouldn't begrudge someone who is sight impaired access to voice activated software. Like we wouldn't begrudge someone that is hearing impaired access to a TTY line, right? Like when we have these sort of more overt, visible external diagnoses, we tend to be more accommodating. It's about all the hidden diagnoses. And the reality is there's more hidden diagnoses than there are observable ones.
To be clear, and we just talked about this previously, if you need glasses, you are disabled. Okay. Man,
look, as I sit on here with glasses on my face. Yes.
And I'm a glasses wearer too, right? Yes. But it's a disability. It is probably the disability that is the most accommodated to disability, right? You can't see. Okay, we'll get you some glasses. We'll figure out a way to get you some glasses because it's a solution to it. But it's a disability,
very
right?
easy.
But we wouldn't tell somebody who needs glasses, you can't do this with your glasses on, right?
Absolutely. Because the way that I feel when I wake up every morning and can't see the cell phone real clear without these glasses, that's not a good feeling, right? I wouldn't be able to do this work. So absolutely. Right. And I think we need to continue to do. What are you going to say? I think we need to continue to have these conversations.
And before we get on to our last nerve, I also do want to point out that not all diagnoses are created equal also, so I don't want to send you out into the world thinking, no, everything's all good, you're okay. There are diagnoses like maybe depression or anxiety that I feel have gotten a little more socially acceptable, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, things maybe like schizophrenia or maybe something related to paranoia, you may be less likely to share those with the job, or for example, substance use or substance abuse issues, for example, that probably I wouldn't share with my job. Right.
Even though it's covered, to be clear, right?
Can't unsee that.
Yes, I think absolutely to be covered. Like alcoholism, addiction to substances are considered a disability, right? For which you could have accommodations. But I don't know too many Black people that feel that secure in their competence at work to say, well, I'm an alcoholic, so you need to give me these accommodations. Like we don't get the same,
right?
What is the word? The same grace of our addictions being seen as non-criminal, as seen as a dysfunction or a mental health issue. So, I appreciate you pointing that out, Jide. Like there is more stigma attached to certain diagnoses, and there is more stigma attached to certain diagnoses for Black folks in particular than there are others. And so that's something you want to definitely keep in mind. And then I want to just another little educational point, because we haven't said this specifically. Jide mentioned before having students that would go to the office of student with disabilities to get their accommodation. That requires a formal and official diagnosis from a physician or mental health professional, right? So it's not like you can say, sometimes I don't feel like I'm at my best. No, you have to have a documented a diagnosis, and that's why we've been using that term diagnosis, right? To be clear.
Yes.
And that,
yes.
And so for folks who may be wondering if they actually meet criteria for a mental health diagnosis, I think I want to always encourage people to take advantage of seeing a mental health professional, so that you can get the information that you need, to better understand yourself and better understand what would help benefit you in living a life that is most optimal. And lastly, let me remind you, I am a licensed therapist, but I'm not your licensed therapist, right? So these are things that you have to take under consideration for yourself.
Yes. And I think that's a great place to kick it off to our last nerve right now. Thank you so much for ending that. So, if you're dealing with some issues, please go get some help to the extent that you can,
Yes. There's a lot of resources out there for Black people too. Whew, give me a minute with this last nerve, y'all. So Netflix has put out a 10-part series covering the crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer. And, I would be honest and say I generally knew who he was and what he had done, but he was arrested in 1991. And so I was still in high school. And so it just wasn't, who's paying attention to world events like that when you're in high school? Not very many people. So I didn't have a full working understanding of it until this series came out. And I'm a psychologist. I'm a therapist. I've always had this really sort of macabre interest in serial killers from it's a fascinating point of view. So I was like, well, let me check it out. And the more that I have watched this show, the angrier I have gotten. And one of the reasons is because this particular approach to his narrative, for which, there's documentaries and other dramatizations about him that exist as well. But the producers, Ryan Murphy, intentionally consulted with Rashad Robinson from Color of Change. And I think he's actually even a producer on the series. And they wanted to highlight the systemic contributions to him being able to get away with what he got away with for so long. And so the show really highlights the impact of white male patriarchy, of homophobia, and of anti-Blackness, and even xenophobia. And the lens that it's taken really highlights the system failed most of his victims. Early on, some of his earlier victims were white, and he was gay. He targeted gay men. There was a sexual component to his compulsions. And outside of his first two kills, which were white people, everybody else he targeted were people of color. They were intentionally people that were marginalized and vulnerable. And there were so many incidents where he could have been caught, but the white detectives upheld the white systems, and they saw him through this lens of this blonde-haired, slightly awkward, but seemingly innocent white guy, right? So one of his Black victims that got away goes to the police to say, this dude is drugging people, and I'm pretty sure he tried to kill me. And I barely got out with my life. And the anti-Blackness, judging him, questioning him, he had to get really irate to even get them to go to question Dahmer. And then he's like, the detective is, if I went in your room looking for drugs, I wouldn't find any, right? What the hell kind of investigation skills is that? And so he could sit there in so many incidents with law enforcement, detectives, patrolmen, and just use his whiteness, use his affability of no, you should believe me. And there was his neighbor that was a Black woman who called multiple times over the years, literally saying, I think he's over there killing people. There's a smell coming from his apartment that cannot be explained. And she just was ignored over and over again. And so we know that white supremacy is and can be deadly for Black folks. But this particular portrayal just highlights how someone with a sickness, right? This psychological deficit, of which he had multiple diagnoses, could flourish because the system protected him simply based on his identities, and how his victims could be so vulnerable because the systems did not protect them at all. So if you watch it, take your time with it. Because I have stood up in my living room several times, been like, are you effing kidding me? What is happening right now? Because the injustice is so it's so obvious. And then one last thing, Jide, the other part about it is, so the guy was killed in prison by a black man.
Yep.
There are people that's been taken to these good internets to say that after watching this series, they have empathy for Jeffrey Dahmer, a man who targeted, victimized, cannibalized, dismembered black men for years.
Young gay black men.
For years. They have empathy because he shouldn't have been killed the way he was. And there's the anti-blackness towards the man that killed him in jail in prison, has sent me through the roof. So even in an instance as distorted as this, he still has the protection of access to his humanity because of his whiteness. And the black man has no access to humanity or empathy because of anti-blackness. I just throw the whole thing away.
And that's why it gets on your last nerve.
And that's why it's got on my last damn nerve. Ooh, thank y'all for letting me get that out of my system. Don't watch it.
Oh, thank you for
Do yourself a favor and don't watch it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in for today's episode of The Break Room. If you have a mental health diagnosis, there is no need to be ashamed, but we also want to encourage you to think critically about who and how you share those diagnoses, especially in the workplace. And until next time, we'll say peace.
Bye.
Living Corporate is brought to you by Doximity. Over 90% of graduating medical students join Doximity to use our tools before earning their doctoral degree. As medicine's largest network, there's an elevated level of responsibility to everything we do. We don't take that responsibility lightly and are committed to working towards a more equitable world inside and beyond our virtual office walls. If you want to learn more about Doximity, make sure you go to your app store, type in DOXIMITY. That's DOXIMITY.